A Florida man blindly emptied an entire 30-round magazine from his AR-15 rifle into his backyard because, apparently, he thought his pool cleaner was there to kill him. No crimes were committed, no charges were filed. Welcome to Florida. This story begins in the home of a Florida couple who, on June 15th, were in their bedrooms at about 9 p.m. when they decided to get up and get something to eat. On the way to the kitchen, the wife hears something on the back lanai. Now, the back lanai is fully enclosed with screen doors, so it is technically an extension of the dwelling. When she hears something, she goes to the sliding glass doors to the lanai and parts the vertical blinds, peers out, and sees someone that she does not recognize, a man about 6 feet tall. She tells her husband, who goes back to the bedroom and retrieves an AR-15 rifle. The two of them then huddle behind the couch in the living room, and the husband trains the AR-15 on the sliding glass doors, which are still covered by the blinds. So the husband is unable to see what's going on the back patio. Uh, so if he is going to shoot the weapon, he has to do so blindly, unless somebody actually enters the home. They're there, huddled behind the couch for about 55 seconds before calling 911. Or at least the unidentified man on the back porch is there for about 55 seconds before the husband and wife call 911. So at this point in the story, it's helpful to look at the video camera footage from the back lanai, because it kind of shows us what's going on the back porch, and we can then piece together what's going on inside the house based on the 911 call to figure out exactly what's going on in the two parts of the home at the same time. So let's have a look. So here's the pool cleaner, the 6 foot tall, as yet unidentified man arriving at the home. He has all of his equipment and he puts a piece of paper on the table near the sliding glass doors. Now, these are the sliding glass doors on which the AR-15 at some point is going to be trained. The pool cleaner is heading around to the side of the house because it's dark outside and he is looking for a light switch. He's unable to find one, so he returns to the pool deck. Upon his return, he appears to be trying to decide what to do. He's picking up his equipment as if he's about to start cleaning, but instead leaves on the other side. Now, this is about the time that the wife calls 911. And as you can see, at this point, the pool cleaner has left the pool deck. He's now on his way to his vehicle, which is parked out front. The vehicle is marked. It's marked with the logo of the pool company with whom the homeowners contracted to have their pool cleaned on a regular basis. Had either the husband or the wife looked out the front door, they likely would have seen the pool cleaner's truck and then determined that it was likely the pool cleaner who was out on their back patio, but they did not do that. He went to his truck, mind you, to go get a flashlight because, as you can see, it's dark, and he's going to have to at some point test the chemicals in the pool and keep a log of his results. So there he is returning with the flashlight or his cell phone with the torch lit. And he's now preparing to test the chemicals in the pool. The husband maintains that he shouted for the pool man or for the unidentified person to leave the backyard. But from the moment that the 911 call starts, throughout the rest of this video, we know that no shouts were made, no warnings were issued, nothing occurred. So it must have been at some point before the 911 call occurred that those shouts or warnings were made. Now, as you can see, he's got to return over to this table to retrieve the piece of paper on which he's going to document the results of his tests. And he has to pick up the torch so that he can see what he's doing. He's now writing on this pool log, which he's then going to return to that table. But it's the return to the table that causes the initial problem. He carries the torch with him. And as you can see, he briefly shines that torch on the sliders, and now the shots are fired. Those were 2 shots, and as you can see, the pool guy immediately fled the pool deck. So, according to the husband, when he saw the unidentified person coming toward the residence, that put him in fear that someone was going to enter the dwelling. Now, mind you, the pool cleaner had been there at that point for roughly 3 minutes and had made no efforts at all to enter the home or even go past those chairs that are on the back patio. No, he spent the entire time doing what he was paid to do, which is clean the pool, test the chemicals, things of that nature. But the presence of that torch, the torch coming toward those doors, was enough to cause the husband to fire 2 rounds into his backyard blindly at whoever was out there proceeding toward those windows. So at this point, there's a question. Well, was the firing of any rounds within the confines of Florida law? And the sheriff answers this question. The county sheriff answers this question for us. Let's see what he has to say.
So you can see from the video, and that's really the end of it, he leaves now. And then 47 seconds later is when the remaining 28 rounds were fired. This is a classic example of what's called the Castle Doctrine, or Florida Stand Your Ground law. Bradley Hokovar was in his home. He was in fear that someone was breaking in. The evidence from the video and from his statements, the audio, his wife's statements on the video, and to detectives, that there's no crime that was committed.
According to the sheriff, this is a classic case of the Castle Doctrine. No crimes were committed. Essentially, the husband was fully justified in what he did. So, let's have a look at the Castle Doctrine and see if the sheriff is correct. Now, the Castle Doctrine reads, a person who is in a dwelling or residence in which the person has a right to be, has no duty to retreat, and has the right to stand his or her ground and use or threaten to use. Now, subsection A talks about non-deadly force, but we're talking about shots fired from an AR-15 rifle, so we're talking about deadly force. So let's go on to subsection B. Subsection B says that he has a right to use or threaten to use deadly force if he or she reasonably believes that using or threatening to use such force is necessary to prevent the imminent death or great bodily harm to a person, or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. So essentially, we know that both the husband and the wife were in their own dwelling, so they fit that part. They have a right to be there, and they don't have a duty to retreat. They do have the right to stand their ground. But do they have the right to use or even threaten to use deadly force? In order for them to have that right, they have to reasonably believe that whoever's on their back porch is about to use deadly force against them. Deadly force which would either result in their death or great bodily harm being inflicted on them. Or that whoever's on the back lanai is about to commit a forcible felony. Now, at this point, from looking at the video, it's kind of unreasonable to think that they were in fear for their lives or great bodily harm. There was obviously no weapon seen. They didn't have a belief that there was a weapon, because that would mean that everybody who hears something outside could believe that whoever's out there has a weapon. So they couldn't have believed that. That wouldn't be reasonable. It wouldn't be reasonable for Florida law to say that if you hear something outside your house, you're justified in believing that whoever's out there has a weapon that they're about to use against you. That wouldn't be reasonable. We wouldn't want the community to be able to get off on shooting rounds outside of their home just because they hear somebody outside and think that maybe they could have a gun or a knife or something that they could use against them. No, that wouldn't be reasonable at all. So the law must not say that. So let's look at the next part. Perhaps they had a reasonable belief that a forcible felony was about to be committed. Now, this is a little easier to get to, this place, this forcible felony place, because at the point that the pool cleaner was advancing on the back door, in order for him to enter the home, he would have had to break in, which is a forcible felony. So it could be within reason for these homeowners to believe that whoever was outside and had been outside for that long was about to commit a forcible felony by entering into their home. So we'll give them that. Let's give them those first two shots. Even if we're wrong, well, it's still, it's a toss-up. We'll call it a toss-up. But they didn't stop there. No, they fired. The husband fired an additional 28 rounds. In fact, 45 seconds after those first two rounds were fired, the husband went through probably another half of the magazine. And then 25 seconds after that, he emptied the entire magazine. 28 additional rounds were fired. Now, you saw from the video that after those first two rounds were fired, this pool cleaner fled, immediately fled. He never returned. He didn't come back and say, well, let me see if they're going to shoot at me again. No, he stayed gone. But 28 more shots were fired out of that now broken sliding glass door. Now, these are rounds from an AR-15 rifle. The maximum range on an AR-15 rifle is a little over 2 miles. That means that this homeowner fired 28 additional rounds at nothing. Blindly at nothing. Why? Was it reasonable 45 seconds after whoever was on his back patio fled? Was it reasonable for this husband to fire additional rounds into a residential neighborhood, rounds that traveled 2 miles, without being able to see what was going on, without being able to see what he was shooting at, and with absolutely no reason to believe that whoever was out there after the first 2 rounds were fired remained? Was it reasonable 25 seconds after that for him to empty out the magazine? Was he in fear for his life at that point? Was he in fear of great bodily harm being inflicted on him after that? Was he in fear that a forcible felony was about to be committed? Well, at this point, even if there was somebody on the back porch, the entire back door is in pieces. He can just walk in the house at this point. So coming in the house isn't even a forcible felony at this point. So no, he's not in fear that a forcible felony is about to be committed. But the fact of the matter is there's nobody out there. Now, we're going to listen to a portion of the audio from the 911 call, and there's a couple things that I want you to pay attention to. One is the wife's tone of voice. 2 is the wife's commands to her husband. And 3 is the thought by these 2 people that they are hearing things coming from their back patio where nobody is. They seem to think that someone is out there, but nobody's there. Because we're going to discuss whether or not Florida law allows for a homeowner to reasonably believe that nothing is something. Let's have a look. So this is where the first 2 are.
What was that? Not the those 2. What was that? Ma'am. My husband. What my husband. What was that thing? It's supposed to Who being shot? They are going around the house. Who? I need to know what that was. I don't know, somebody was Was that a gunshot? Yes, it was a gunshot. Who shot it? Who shot it? My husband, because they are walking around here with a...
Now he's about to fire additional ones.
Stop shooting.
And immediately,
Stop shooting the gun.
the wife tells him to stop.
I need him to stop shooting the gun.
Repeatedly tells him to stop.
Why?
His response is why?
I don't know.
It empties the magazine.
Hello, ma'am.
All while his wife is telling him to stop.
Stop it, please. Nothing, stop it. I need him to stop.
The wife was on the phone calmly talking to the 911 operator. And the only time that you hear her voice get elevated, that you hear a rise out of her is when her husband is shooting, when she's telling him to stop, when she's pleading with him to stop. She doesn't seem like a person who is in fear for her life, who is in fear that great bodily harm is going to be inflicted on her, who is in fear that someone is about to commit a forcible felony on her property. She sounds like someone who's afraid that her husband is about to kill somebody. Those 28 additional rounds were being fired into thin air. Now, you heard on the audio that they are saying that they heard somebody walking around the house. Now, mind you, all of the shots were fired onto the pool deck. But the wife is telling the operator that we hear somebody walking around the house. So essentially, we hear this guy running away. But they're firing shots onto the pool deck. They're firing shots at nothing. So what is it that they hear on the back patio? What is it that they hear on the pool deck that is giving them reason to believe that firing rounds onto the pool deck is going to somehow eliminate whatever threat they have to their person or to their property? Whatever threat there is to their life, to their safety, or to them not having a forcible felony committed on their property. No, they were shooting at nothing. Which means that if Florida law says you have a right to stand your ground and use deadly force against nothing at all, against the wind, the rustle of the leaves, then that gives me as a Florida resident the right to fire rounds into my backyard whenever I want. As long as I can say at the end, I heard something that put me in fear. It put me in fear of my life, or it put me in fear that a forcible felony was about to be committed. Because that's what the sheriff is saying here. He's saying that those 28 additional rounds, fired at nothing, were within the confines of Florida law. So he's also saying that Florida law allows Florida residents to shoot at nothing, as long as at the end they say they're in fear. Well, whether they were in fear or not, no one can ever prove that or disprove it for that matter. But as long as they say it, they're good. That's what that sheriff is saying Florida law says. But you read the law. We read it together. And that's not what it says. There has to be a reasonable belief. And believing that nothing is something isn't a reason for you to shoot rounds from an AR-15 into a residential neighborhood, for you to risk the lives of your neighbors, for you to risk the lives of passersby, for you to risk the lives of the police officers that had already been dispatched to the scene, who could at this point have been going around the property to secure the premises. Florida law doesn't say that. Unless the sheriff says it does. Or unless the state's attorney says it does. And decides not to prosecute. Which means that when the next time this happens, and somebody does get shot, a passerby, or a police officer, or a neighbor, they get to pull up this video and say, nope, look, the sheriff said this is not a crime. Let's listen to the sheriff recap exactly what happened here.
So 47 seconds after he fired the first 2 rounds, and 47 seconds after Pollock actually ran away, but again, they still say they heard noise out there, Bradley Hokovar fired additional rounds, and then 25 seconds after that, he fired more rounds. In total, Bradley Hokovar fired 30 rounds from the rifle in about 90 seconds.
47 seconds after those first 2 rounds were fired. 47 seconds after the pool guy left the pool deck, the husband fired additional rounds. 25 seconds after that, pool guy's still gone. The husband empties the clip. That means before the husband emptied the clip, the pool guy had been gone for 1 minute and 12 seconds. 1 minute and 12 seconds. He had been gone before the homeowner emptied the clip on an AR-15 rifle. I can't imagine a universe in which that's reasonable, in which someone can fear for their life 1 minute and 12 seconds after everybody's gone. But apparently, in Florida, this is reasonable. How do we know? Because the sheriff told us.
So this is one of those things that, I guess if I was going to sum it up, I mean, it's a terrible set of circumstances, but it's unfortunate, avoidable, but it wasn't in this case. It's probably one of those things that I would call lawful but awful. I mean,
The sheriff is right. This is a terrible set of circumstances. This pool cleaner came to these people's home at 9 p.m. He probably shouldn't have done that. Apparently he had been running late. He had a lot to do that day, and he didn't think it would be a problem to show up after dark at 9 p.m. to the home of these 2 people who live in a gated community on a gated street. Show up to the home where he apparently had to type in the code at the gate to get in, because we hear the wife giving the code to the 911 operator on the call so that the police can get in. So we know that it's gated, and we know that he gained access. But he still probably shouldn't have done that. And even if he was going to do that, he probably should have called ahead or texted the homeowners. He could have honked when he got out front. Maybe they would have looked out the front and seen that his truck was there. Maybe he should have knocked on the door. This was a terrible set of circumstances. But where I have to disagree with the sheriff is when he says this is lawful but awful. No, this is just awful. It's also unlawful. Again, we're giving these homeowners the first 2 shots. But this man's wife was afraid as her husband continued to fire rounds into their backyard. You can hear the fear in her voice as she's pleading with him to stop. And it sounds like she's in fear that her husband has lost control, that the adrenaline is just so much that he just has to keep shooting. Unfortunately, It seems as if we've been listening to so much rhetoric, at least in this state, saying that we are empowered to disregard the lives of others as long as we can say that there's a reasonable basis for us to fear for ourselves and our property. That's not the intent of the law. But as long as we have sheriffs, and as long as we have state's attorneys who are unwilling to file charges or to prosecute cases where things like this happen, then us regular Florida residents are going to feel even more emboldened to do the same thing over and over until we start losing innocent lives. And then we probably still won't do anything about it. Like I said at the beginning, welcome to Florida. I urge you to consider whether you want Florida to be an archetype for the entire nation. My name is Nathan Saunders, and this is The Legal Good.